Elliot, an experienced hiker, stumbled upon a bizarre sight while trekking near a remote river. A massive troop of gorillas was gathered in the water, moving in a strange, synchronized way. He couldn't believe his eyes. For a moment, Elliot couldn't believe what he was seeing, but as he watched closer, his curiosity quickly turned to fear. Something wasn't right. A cold chill ran down his spine as he realized the truth. Whatever the gorillas were doing, it was more dangerous than anything he could have ever imagined. Elliot held his breath as he scanned his surroundings, trying to determine the best way out. He needed to get away as quickly as possible without any gorilla spotting him, but this was going to be more difficult than he thought. "Shit!" he muttered under his breath when he dropped his phone in the mud. He had been looking for a signal to call for help, but there was none. He took a few deep breaths to gather the courage he needed to carry out his plan. Well, it wasn't really a plan. It was simply his only shot at getting out of there alive. He had one chance, and he didn't have another choice. 3, 2, he whispered, preparing himself to jump into action. 1, now! And he ran up the hill as fast as he could. Of course, some of the gorillas heard him, and they immediately came running after him. They were fast, faster than Elliot, but luckily he had another trick up his sleeve. He was almost out of breath when he tripped over a tree branch, and he knew he needed to act quickly. He couldn't waste a single second now, or things might end very badly for him. But what were the gorillas doing there? What was Elliot's plan? And would he ever get out alive? At first, Elliot had been surprised to see a single gorilla in the water. He had not expected to find any of them in this area. But as he carefully approached the river, he noticed there were many more of them. He was mesmerized by the sight and stopped in his tracks to watch them, curious about what they were doing. He wasn't scared, at least not yet. He moved silently, and none of the gorillas seemed to notice him. They were all moving in the same way, and it seemed like they were performing some kind of ritual. Elliot didn't know much about gorillas, but no matter how long he watched them, he couldn't make sense of what they were doing. He took some pictures with his phone, staying at a safe distance. His friends would never believe him unless he had proof. Suddenly, the gorillas started making loud noises, and it startled Elliot. Quickly, but very carefully, so as not to make any noise, he stepped back, hiding behind a tree where they wouldn't be able to see him. The forest now echoed with the gorillas' screams and hoots, and Elliot suddenly felt very uneasy. He had the feeling he shouldn't be there, and he should get away as soon as possible. But he was too intrigued to leave. The gorillas were now jumping around in the water and splashing, but it still seemed rhythmic, like they were doing it with a purpose. Elliot peeked at them from behind the tree and snapped a few more pictures, all while telling himself, "Elliot, you have to leave now." But he wanted to understand this whole ritual first. What were these gorillas doing? It wasn't long before the pieces of the puzzle came together and it all clicked. Elliot gasped as he realized what was really going on, and he cursed himself for not leaving when he first had that bad feeling. Now, it would be much harder to leave without being seen, but he knew he couldn't waste another second. He needed to run, or things might end very badly for him. He took a few deep breaths, counted to 3, and then ran up the hill as fast as he could. Of course, some of the gorillas spotted him, and they immediately ran after him. They were much faster and knew their way around the woods. Elliot needed to come up with a plan on the spot, or things might end very badly for him. He was almost out of breath when he tripped over a tree branch, and he knew he needed to act quickly. He scanned his surroundings, looking for anything that could save his life, while the gorilla's hoots grew louder and louder. Then he spotted it, a hollow tree. He quickly pushed himself into the hole. He barely fit, and held his breath. Elliot squeezed himself into the hollow tree, hoping the gorillas would pass by without noticing him. The rough bark scraped against his back, but he didn't dare move a muscle. The sounds of grunting and rustling grew closer, and his heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. He held his breath, praying that his hiding spot would be enough to save him. He could hear the gorillas getting closer and prayed they wouldn't check inside the tree. Every crunch of leaves under their feet sent a shiver down his spine. He imagined the heavy footsteps of the alpha male approaching, snorting and sniffing around for any sign of intruders. The tension was unbearable. Elliot felt like he was about to faint from fear, but he managed to stay calm. The gorillas sniffed around the tree but eventually moved on, and Elliot stayed as still as possible. He felt a sigh of relief wanting to escape, but he knew it wasn't the right time yet. The rustling of foliage and the heavy breathing of the gorillas started to fade away. Slowly, Elliot began to regain his composure, though his nerves were still on edge from the close call. After a few tense minutes, Elliot slowly emerged from the hollow tree, making sure the coast was clear. He glanced around cautiously before stepping fully out. His legs were numb from being cramped inside, but he pushed through the discomfort, knowing he had to move. The forest had gone eerily quiet, and every sound was amplified in his heightened state of alertness. He needed a new plan to get away without being detected again by the gorillas. The realization hit him hard. He couldn't rely on hiding alone. Scanning his surroundings, Elliot tried to think of all the survival tactics he knew. Suddenly, the idea struck him. He could use the river to mask his presence. It wasn't foolproof, but it was his best chance at escaping unscathed. Elliot decided to head back to the river, hoping the noise of the water would cover his movements. Carefully plotting his route, he started to creep back through the forest, sticking to the shadows. The hushed murmur of the river grew louder as he neared it. Each step was deliberate as he avoided stepping on twigs or leaves. He couldn't afford to be careless again. Moving carefully, he made his way back to the river, staying hidden behind trees and bushes. He crouched low, making sure to use the natural cover to his advantage. Every now and then, he paused to listen, ensuring he wasn't being followed. The sound of the flowing water became his guide, urging him onward. Finally, he could see the riverbank through a gap in the foliage. When he reached the river, he noticed the gorillas were now scattered and not as synchronized as before. They seemed more relaxed, perhaps unaware of his presence. Elliot could see some of them lounging by the water, while others foraged nearby. This gave him a glimmer of hope. If they were distracted, he might be able to slip away unnoticed. He just had to time it right. This gave Elliot hope that he might be able to slip away while the gorillas were distracted. He watched their movements carefully, waiting for the right moment to make his move. The sound of water splashing and the gorillas' occasional grunts filled the air. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but this might be his best shot. Gathering his courage once more, he prepared to step into the river. He cautiously stepped into the river, trying to make as little noise as possible. The cool water sent chills up his spine, but he stayed focused on his goal. Moving slowly, he let the current guide him, making sure to stay hidden in the shadows. The sound of rushing water helped mask his escape, and every silent step brought him closer to freedom. He just had to keep his nerve. As Elliot moved through the water, he kept an eye on the gorillas, making sure none of them spotted him. The current was stronger than he anticipated, making it tough to stay upright. His heart raced as he navigated the slippery riverbed. He knew that one wrong move could alert the gorillas to his presence. Each step was a calculated risk, bringing him closer to potential freedom. Suddenly, a loud splash from behind startled Elliot, and he turned to see a gorilla approaching. His mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. The gorilla seemed curious, not yet in attack mode, but that could change in an instant. Elliot's throat tightened as the gorilla closed the distance between them. He needed to think fast before it was too late. Elliot quickly ducked behind a large boulder, hoping the gorilla didn't see him. He pressed his back against the cold, damp rock, trying to steady his breathing. Every muscle in his body tensed as he listened for the gorilla's movements. The sound of water splashing against the boulder added to his anxiety. Silently, he prayed that this temporary hiding spot would keep him concealed. The gorilla moved closer, seemingly curious about the noise Elliot had made. Its dark eyes scanned the area, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Elliot could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He stayed absolutely still, knowing any sudden movement could give him away. The tension was almost unbearable as he waited for the gorilla to make its next move. Elliot held his breath and stayed as still as possible, waiting for the gorilla to lose interest. The seconds felt like hours as he watched the gorilla's every move. It sniffed the air a few more times, then continued on its way, seemingly satisfied for now. Elliot didn't dare to move until the gorilla had fully disappeared from sight. Finally, he exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. After what felt like an eternity, the gorilla finally moved away, allowing Elliot to relax slightly. He took a few cautious deep breaths, grateful for the temporary reprieve. Still, he knew he couldn't let his guard down. The danger was far from over. He needed to figure out his next move quickly before the gorilla or its companions returned. Staying hidden wouldn't be enough to guarantee his safety. Elliot knew he couldn't stay in the river forever, so he decided to move to higher ground. He spotted a steep hill nearby, one that offered a better vantage point. Carefully, he started making his way towards it, using the natural cover of trees and bushes to stay hidden. Each step felt precarious, but he was determined to reach a safer spot. The thought of being caught was terrifying, pushing him onward. Elliot spotted a steep hill nearby and started climbing, hoping the elevation would give him a better view of his surroundings. His legs burned with each step, but he pressed on, driven by the need for safety. Halfway up, he paused to catch his breath and scan the area for any signs of the gorillas. The climb was challenging, but the promise of a better vantage point kept him going. With each step, he carefully checked for signs of the gorillas, making sure they weren't following him. His eyes darted between the trail ahead and the forest below. He strained his ears to catch any sounds of pursuit. The higher he climbed, the clearer his perspective became. The rustling leaves and chirping birds were the only noises he heard. His determination to stay ahead fueled his movements. As he reached the top of the hill, Elliot felt a surge of relief, thinking he might finally be safe. The panoramic view allowed him to see any approaching danger more easily. He scanned the area, noting potential escape routes and hiding spots. The tranquility of the moment was a stark contrast to the chaos he had just experienced. For the first time in hours, he dared to hope. But then he spotted another group of gorillas in the distance, moving purposefully through the trees. Their movements were synchronized, a stark reminder of the earlier scene at the river. Every muscle in his body tensed as he watched them, realizing he was still in grave danger. The gorillas appeared to be on a mission. Their path could intersect with his at any moment. Elliot knew he needed to act quickly. Elliot realized he needed to find a way out of the forest before the gorillas spotted him again. His pulse quickened as he scanned the dense foliage, searching for any path that might lead to safety. Every second counted. The gorillas were getting closer. He forced himself to stay calm, clearing his mind to focus on finding an escape route. This was a game of survival, and he was determined to win. He quickly scanned the area for a safe path that would lead him away from the gorillas. The forest was thick with undergrowth, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Every shadow seemed like a potential threat. His eyes darted from tree to tree, desperately seeking an opening. Then, through the dense foliage, he spotted what looked like a narrow trail. To his right, he noticed a narrow trail that seemed to wind through the forest, and he decided to take it. The path was barely visible, camouflaged by the thick greenery. With no better option in sight, Elliot hoped it would lead to safety. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. The trail was his best bet, so he moved swiftly towards it. Elliot moved swiftly but cautiously, keeping his ears open for any signs of the gorillas. Each step was measured, ensuring he didn't make any noise that could alert the troop. The forest seemed to close in around him as he navigated the narrow trail. The feeling of being watched never left him, pushing him to move faster. He had to rely on his instincts to get out of this alive. The trail was overgrown and difficult to navigate, but he pressed on, determined to find his way out. Bushes and low-hanging branches scratched at his arms and legs as he forged through the thick underbrush. His heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let fear slow him down. He knew he couldn't afford to stop, not with the gorillas so close. He had to keep moving. As he continued along the trail, he began to hear faint voices in the distance, giving him a glimmer of hope. The sound was barely discernible over the rustling of leaves and the calls of distant animals, but it was unmistakable. Someone else was out there. He felt a surge of energy and began to move faster, spurred on by the prospect of finding help. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. Elliot picked up his pace, eager to reach the source of the voices and find help. His muscles burned with exertion, but he pushed through the pain. The trail became slightly clearer, lending him some confidence that he was heading in the right direction. The voices grew louder, more distinct. He could make out snippets of conversation. With each step, the hope of rescue became more tangible. He emerged from the dense forest and found himself in a small clearing with a campsite. The sight of tents and a smouldering fire pit filled him with relief. People were gathered around the fire, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Elliot paused for a moment, catching his breath and gathering his thoughts. He needed to make sure they understood the urgency of the situation. A group of hikers were gathered around a fire, and Elliot called out to them, relief in his voice. "Hey, over here!" he shouted, waving his arms to get their attention. The hikers turned to look at him, their faces showing a mix of surprise and concern. He hurried over, his urgency palpable. "You need to help me," he said breathlessly. "There are gorillas nearby. We need to get out of here now." The hikers turned to him, surprised by his sudden appearance. One of them, a tall man wearing a green jacket, stepped forward. "Are you okay?" he asked, reaching out a hand. Elliot took it gratefully. "Not really," he said, catching his breath. The urgency in his voice made the hikers exchange worried glances. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the woman beside the tall man remarked. Elliot quickly explained his situation, describing the strange behavior of the gorillas and his harrowing escape. "They were all synchronized, like they were doing some kind of ritual," he said, his voice shaking slightly. He emphasized the danger. "It was like they were trying to trap something, or someone." The hikers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each word he spoke. The hikers listened intently, exchanging worried glances as they tried to make sense of his story. "That sounds terrifying," the woman said, her face pale. "Are you certain they were gorillas?" asked another hiker skeptically. Elliot nodded firmly. "Yes, I'm absolutely sure. I've never seen anything like it. We need to get out and inform someone about this." The group fell silent, processing the urgency. "We should report this to the park rangers," suggested one of the hikers, a wildlife enthusiast with a keen interest in animal behaviors. He adjusted his glasses, looking around at his companions. "It's too dangerous to ignore. They might know what to do." The others nodded in agreement. "Elliot, can you lead us to the nearest ranger station?" the tall man asked. Elliot agreed without hesitation. Elliot agreed and joined the hikers as they made their way back to the nearest ranger station. They picked up their pace, moved quickly through the forest, keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. The area seemed eerily quiet, which only added to their sense of urgency. As they walked, Elliot couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, feeling as though they were being watched. Upon arriving at the station, they quickly informed the rangers about the unusual behavior of the gorillas. "You need to hear this," the wildlife enthusiast said as they burst through the door. The rangers looked up from their desks, surprise evident on their faces. Elliot took a deep breath and started recounting his experience. "There's something seriously wrong in that part of the forest," he concluded. The rangers took the report seriously and assured Elliot they would investigate the situation. "This sounds highly unusual, but we'll look into it immediately," one of them said, grabbing a notepad and jotting down details. "We can't ignore this," another ranger added, already gearing up. Elliot felt a small sense of relief, knowing that professionals were finally on the case. Elliot and the hikers were advised to stay at the station until the rangers could confirm it was safe to leave. "We don't want to take any unnecessary risks," a ranger explained. They all agreed it was the prudent thing to do. Elliot felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as they settled into a waiting area. Time seemed to slow down as they awaited news from the forest. While waiting, Elliot shared more details about his encounter, hoping to provide as much information as possible. "The way they moved, it was almost military-like," he recalled. The hikers listened intently, asking questions and trying to piece everything together. Elliot explained as much as he could remember, wanting to ensure the rangers had all the information they needed for their investigation. The rangers seemed particularly interested in the synchronized movements and noises made by the gorillas. One of them, a senior ranger, leaned in closer. "This kind of coordinated behavior is not typical," he said thoughtfully. "It could mean they were trying to communicate something." The wildlife enthusiast nodded. "Could be a warning or an invitation. Either way, it's something we need to understand." One of the rangers suggested that the behavior could be related to a natural phenomenon or external influence. "It's possible they're reacting to something in their environment we're not aware of," he said. The wildlife enthusiast nodded in agreement, but looked worried. Elliot, however, couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that there was something more sinister at play. He knew the gorillas were doing something deliberate and potentially dangerous. Elliot was relieved to have found safety, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He kept replaying the eerie scene in his mind. "I can't help but think we're missing something important," he said, his voice tinged with worry. The rangers exchanged glances, considering his words. Finally, one of them suggested they investigate further, and Elliot felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they'd get to the bottom of this. As the rangers prepared to investigate, they asked Elliot to accompany them as a guide. "You're the only one who's seen this," the senior ranger explained. "We need your help to find the exact location." Elliot hesitated for a moment, his fear rearing its head. But then he nodded, realizing he couldn't turn back now. If they were going to figure this out, they needed his first-hand knowledge. Despite his fear, Elliot agreed, wanting to ensure the rangers knew exactly where to look. "I'll do it," he said, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The rangers thanked him and started gathering their gear. "Don't worry, we'll be prepared," one of them assured him, holding up a tranquilizer gun. Elliot felt a mix of trepidation and determination. He had to push through his fear for the sake of uncovering the truth. They set out together, retracing Elliot's steps through the forest towards the river where the gorillas had been seen. The atmosphere was tense as they moved through the underbrush. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed louder in the silence. Elliot led the way, pointing out landmarks he remembered from his earlier escape. The rangers followed closely, their senses heightened by the threat of danger lurking nearby. Elliot led the rangers carefully, pointing out the spots where he had hidden and escaped. "I hid behind that boulder over there," he said, gesturing to a large rock. The rangers nodded, noting the terrain and any natural cover that could be useful. Slowly but surely, they made their way to the riverbank. The eerie feeling from before crept back into Elliot's mind, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. When they reached the river, the rangers observed the area for any signs of the gorillas. The tension was palpable as they scanned the water and the surrounding forest. "Everyone stay alert," the senior ranger instructed. Elliot's eyes darted around, looking for any movement. The forest seemed still, but they all knew that could change in an instant. Caution and vigilance were their best defenses now. It didn't take long for them to spot the gorillas, who were once again gathered in the water. "Over there," whispered one of the rangers, pointing to the cluster of dark shapes. Elliot's pulse quickened, recognizing the synchronized movements. The gorillas seemed to be engrossed in their mysterious activity. "They're doing it again," Elliot breathed, his mind racing with questions. The rangers exchanged serious looks, knowing they had to understand this behavior. The rangers took notes and recorded the behavior, trying to understand what the gorillas were doing. "This is unlike anything I've seen before," one ranger commented, scribbling in a notepad. Elliot watched the gorillas intently, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The synchronized movements were almost mesmerizing. Every splash and grunt seemed calculated. "We need to figure out their intent," the senior ranger said, focusing his gaze on the troop. Suddenly, one of the rangers noticed something unusual. The gorillas were setting up a trap in the water. "Look at that!" he exclaimed softly, pointing. Elliot squinted to see better. Sure enough, he could see the gorillas arranging sticks and stones in a deliberate pattern. "What are they planning?" another ranger wondered aloud. The realization struck them all at once. These gorillas were smarter and more organized than anyone had anticipated. They watched in awe as the gorillas synchronized their movements, clearly performing some kind of ritual. The eerie precision of their actions was unsettling. Each step, splash, and grunt seemed to serve a purpose. As the gorillas worked to arrange sticks and stones strategically, it became apparent they were setting a trap to lure other animals. This clever strategy could only have been driven by their desperate need for food. Elliot felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the dangerous purpose behind the gorillas' synchronized movements. They were starving, and this ritual was their way of hunting. He could see the desperation in their eyes. "We need to act fast," one of the rangers whispered. Elliot nodded in agreement, understanding the urgency of the situation. The gorillas were capable of more than anyone had imagined. The rangers decided to intervene, carefully planning how to safely redirect the gorillas away from the area. "We can't let them set any more traps," the senior ranger said. They gathered in a huddle, using a map to strategize. "We need to lure them back into the deeper parts of the forest," one ranger suggested. Elliot listened intently, knowing he'd play a crucial role in this risky operation. With Elliot's help, they devised a way to draw the gorillas' attention and lead them deeper into the forest. "We'll use loud noises to grab their attention," the senior ranger explained. Elliot agreed to mimic animal calls while the rangers would create disturbances. "It's risky, but it's our best shot," said another ranger. With the plan set, they prepared to put it into action, hoping it would work smoothly. The plan worked, and the gorillas began to follow the rangers' lead, moving away from the river. Elliot's heart pounded as he made animal calls from a safe distance. The rangers clapped and shouted, creating a cacophony of noise. The gorillas, visibly confused but curious, moved towards the deeper parts of the forest. Slowly but surely, they left the river, heading into thicker vegetation where they would hopefully be safer. Once the area was clear, the rangers contacted an animal welfare organization to relocate the gorillas to their natural habitat. "We need to make sure they're safe and back where they belong," the senior ranger stated. The organization responded promptly, organizing a team to handle the relocation. Elliot felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized they were one step closer to resolving the crisis. Elliot watched as the gorillas were safely transported, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. The animal welfare team worked efficiently, ensuring the gorillas were comfortable and secure during the move. Elliot and the rangers helped coordinate, making sure everything went smoothly. As the last gorilla was loaded onto the transport vehicle, Elliot exhaled deeply. They had done it. The danger had passed, and the gorillas were on their way to a better place. Back at the ranger station, Elliot thanked the rangers and hikers for their help and support. "I couldn't have done it without you all," he admitted. The rangers smiled and nodded, appreciating his gratitude. The hikers expressed their relief and shared their own sense of accomplishment. As they debriefed, Elliot felt a profound sense of unity with these strangers who had become his unlikely allies in this harrowing adventure. Elliot returned home, grateful to have survived the encounter and determined to share his story with others. He knew people needed to hear about the extraordinary event and the importance of protecting wildlife. As he recounted his adventure to friends and family, he felt a deep sense of purpose. The experience had changed him, and he realized that he could make a difference by raising awareness and advocating for animal conservation.